Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. I feel that in Canada, it would be easier for me to organize a vegan foundation cooperating with conservatives who go hunting, but who sincerely care about preserving forest habitat, than it would be for me to cooperate with left-wingers, socialists, communists, for whom veganism is just one more check mark on a nearly endless list of so-called social justice issues. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am wrong. I got a letter the other day, I got an email from a 60-year-old vegan in Australia. I'm not going to read the letter out now, but one of his main points in being a vegan, 60 years old, he tried to get involved with an animal rights group, but the animal rights group was not vegan. So they had people eating cheese and meat, and they refused to use the word vegan. They obviously regarded veganism as negative and extreme. When he raised vegan issues about slaughterhouses, they gave him this lecture about how you should believe in humane slaughter and believe in people's freedom of personal choice, the usual anti-vegan horseshit. And, so no matter how you define your group politically, you're going to alienate some people, you're going to exclude some people. And this animal rights group in Australia alienated him. It excluded him. And if you have a vegan foundation, a foundation that is first and foremost vegan, a foundation where all of the members have to be vegan before they can come in the door, then you alienate and exclude all kinds of other people. And, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, when I was in Canada, it was much easier for me to be understood ethically by people who were Cree and Ojibwe, who really engaged in hunting, who hunt, moose and beaver, but who regarded factory farming as evil. I had no problem talking to those guys about veganism, and they're not vegan. And I've never had a problem relating to and communicating with down-to-earth conservative people. That's not all conservative people, I understand. Who, again, part of conservatism tends to be conservation, who care about conservation, whether it's of forest or wetlands or lakes or rivers, who may not see ecology in the way I do, who may not see their personal responsibility for their choices as a consumer in the way that I do, but who still fundamentally look at a map and share some of my concerns. One of the funny breaking points in the deforestation of Canada, which is much, much worse than anyone wants to admit it is, by the way. I remember, these problems only come to the government's attention when somebody lobbies for them. There was a lobby, a political group that got organized of small aircraft pilots. So these are what we call in Canada bush planes. And these small aircraft pilots, one of the main ways they make money, of course, they deliver packages, they do all kinds of things. But one of the ways they make money is by taking tourists and wealthy Canadian nature lovers, taking them on small flights, normally without landing. They could fly out, land, go fishing, and fly back. Some wealthy people pay for that kind of thing in Canada. But a lot of the time, people want to pay money for these small aircraft to just take them and show them the beauty, the alleged beauty of the Canadian forest. And looking at the map, looking at the progress of deforestation in Canada, these guys were having a harder and harder time doing this because the brutal reality of forestry practices in Canada, when you got past all the bullshit, all the propaganda, Canada really didn't have any forest left to show off. And these guys were in the tiny minority of people who are in a position to know that, position to see that. And, I just mentioned, if you work on those issues from a political science perspective, there is so much intentionally vague and misleading language in government documents. I remember we had city documents, the city of Toronto, that referred to green spaces and open spaces. Open space includes parking lots. They were making claims about how environmentally friendly a city Toronto was on the basis of green space and so-called open space. And it's like, no. Check the appendix. Check the appendix and check the footnotes. What is the definition of open space? What is the definition of green? Green space is not a forest, right? And as we say, you probably all know this slogan: a tree farm is not a forest. I think the good thing about life is, and the good thing about politics, everybody gets a second chance, everybody gets a third chance, everybody gets a fifth chance. You get to be wrong. The stakes are not life and death here. They're not that bad. This guy is 60 years old. He had this negative experience with one foundation. He quit. He's going to go on and try to have a positive experience with some other foundation. He mentions, I think there's another group called ACT, A-C-T, capital A-C-T, which is a different vegan society in Canberra, Australia. It sounds like he's had a relatively positive experience with them. He's not completely satisfied. He's looking for other ways he can make a positive difference in terms of activism. But still, it's not all bad. The good news is you get to try again and again. You get to try to start your own foundation to replace the foundations that are bad. And it's never an either or, right? If I were back in Canada, I could have one foundation that's really based on positive cooperation with and outreach to hunters and meat eaters, all the people who care about forest habitat and river water. Most of those people in Canada are conservative. Most of them aren't just meat eaters, they're hunters. A lot of them are rural Canadians too. But in terms of the wealthy donors for a foundation like that, they're not the social justice warriors. They're not the people on the far left who are in the streets protesting because they want a law in Toronto that will force the government to use a list of 46 different gender-neutral pronouns for transgendered people who neither want to identify as male nor female. Which, by the way, is a minority of transgender people. Many, many transgender people want to identify as either male or female. The people who are in the social justice struggle of the day on the far left are not the same people who are going to be involved in those ecological issues in Canada. But at the same time, man, there are all these fights, there are all these debates that I don't want to have within veganism, where I can totally recognize the value in reaching out to others. But at some point, you have to come home. You have to have some place you feel is home. You have to have some people who feel who you feel are your colleagues and contemporaries, and not your enemies. I don't want to, within my own organization, have to sit down and deal with the argument that humane slaughter and free-range eggs and personal choice are the solution and that veganism is crazy and extreme. So I don't know, man. Maybe that's just, two different foundations, two different organizations, or two different sides of your life. But there's no doubt that outreach, there's no doubt that cooperating with people who disagree with you fundamentally is demoralizing and emotionally exhausting and difficult. But, both sides learn from it. The guys I met, the Cree and Ojibwe guys I talked to, who hunt moose and hunt beaver and care about care about the traditions of their people. I remember one of them was an enthusiast about the traditional ritual dancing, the religious dancing. Each of them were very different characters. I don't think those guys had ever met a vegan before. I'm sure of it now that I remember. I don't think any of them had met someone who was a former scholar of Buddhism or who had lived in Cambodia. For them, meeting me gave them a lot to think about, gave them a very different perspective on life, and gave them a very different set of questions. And for me meeting them, it was really interesting to meet people, who care about those issues from such a different perspective. It was interesting for me to meet people who considered hunting a wild moose moral and good, but who, by the same token, looked at the reality of factory farming and milk production and, animals living in captivity their whole lives, and who regarded that as evil. So, and conversely, it is true that if I live my life within an echo chamber, within a hothouse, within a very closed circle of people who only agree with me on those fundamental issues, whether they're left-wing or not, then, I don't know, maybe through those interactions, we would be learning nothing at all.